Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe Press, the current president of the Grand Elk Board, and welcome to our Grand Elk Community Investment Fee meeting. We're here to give information, we're here to get information, and hopefully we'll find it informative, enjoyable. If you like it, there's going to be 2 more shows. We've got one on the Front Range at Fox Hollow on Monday. You're welcome to come again. And then on July 18th, there will be a virtual meeting. That's why I'm mic'd up. I'm being filmed, and they'll have that, and then an opportunity for questions and answers for that. So welcome to the first of 3 meetings. So that's our agenda, and I know that's in your handout, so I'm not going to dwell on that. The purpose of our meeting. Well, as I said before, it's to get information out about our proposed community investment fee, the need for it, other ideas that we took into account in trying to address the issues of funding. The case for we'll also state our case for the community investment fee, why we think it's a good option. First off, I do want to say the community investment fee, how it works. It's a fee that's assessed on the transfer of real estate within Grand Elk, and that'll happen after it becomes effective. It's based on, right now, maybe the purchase price, and it's borne by the buyer. It's assessed to the buyer. Now, that's the way it's proposed. As we've currently set it up. At the end of the presentation, then we want to hear from our members. So please let us get through the presentation first, hold your questions, jot them down, and we'll take this all at the end. It's an informal meeting. Informal from the standpoint that we're not going to take a vote on anything, there's not going to be formal action. Again, it's about the exchange of information. So, the ground rules for the meeting. So we want to hear from our members. So we kind of want to restrict the input, the speaking at the meeting, to registered owners. So if you're a guest here, you're not a registered owner, and you have a question, you have 2 options. One is whisper it into the ear of a registered owner and have them deliver it to us, or you can submit them via email, and we'll try to respond to those. We want to stay focused in this meeting. We're here to talk about community investment fee, why we need it, how it fits into other items. When we get to the end and we have our members making questions and comments, please be respectful of others. We want to kind of limit it to maybe 3 minutes or so that others can have their say. So we would appreciate you being mindful of that. So with that, we get to the, thank you, background. And the first item on the background is learning from our past. And who better to speak to us about that than Tom Fry? He's been here since the beginning of time. I think he was responsible for pushing out the last of the mastodons before we developed the golf course. So Tom's going to give us a short history of how we got to where we are.
For better or worse. So as Joe said, I am currently 2 months away from retiring after 13 years of doing this. So somebody out here is going to have to volunteer to be on the board. I want to do a real brief history first. The first house was built here in 2001. At that time, the proposal included a marina, a ski hut, if you will, at Winter Park, and the golf course. And there was a $30,000 membership fee that was not optional. As time went on, the developer gradually got rid of the fees. 9/11 happened, the housing market collapsed. Grand Elk was not paying their dues. In 2007, we had an agreement signed by the town. Let me go back a step. Stan Opperman, Stan, are you here? We petitioned Grand Elk to let a member of the community on the board. And Stan Opperman was on it for 2 years. He resigned because of what he thought were financial inappropriate behavior by the developer. That was followed by Frank Sear, who unfortunately is no longer here. He lives in Arizona, so he can golf all year long. And then I got on the board. We got a committee together with John. I think you were on the committee with Frank and myself and a couple of other people. And we found in, I believe it was Kiowa, a small regulation that said if the developer did not move forward with building, with land acquisition, that they would lose their developer rights. That was very important because up until that time they could do whatever they wanted with everything. They ignored the rules. In 2007, we had a meeting of the homeowners to vote on the roads. Grand Elk was told they could not get building permits from the town of Granby if they did not agree to permanently maintain the roads, even though the town would own the roads. We had a meeting. Everything was discussed. I will tell you that I was at the meeting and the results that I have found were absolutely falsified. Everybody here, with the exception of Grand Elk, voted against that resolution. There were 200 votes which they put down as non-voting, and they voted their 300 votes and signed an agreement with the town stating that we would maintain the roads forever, and once the developer was gone, that the HOA was required to do it. In 2000, that was 2007. In 2009, we found the portion about developer rights, and the day after Christmas, we informed them that they were no longer developers because they did not meet the qualifications of being a developer. And that's when the HOA took over the development. We are not developers. We were all volunteers. 2012, we did our first full reserve study. The only reserve studies done prior to that were done by the developer. I've talked to the accountant who did the annual accounting statement, and he relates the developer told them what the reserves were, and they just incorporated that into their accounting. So the quality of that study is at best unknown. In 2012, the HOA board commissioned a reserve study which said that by 2018 we needed $2.5 million as well as money spent in the meantime. In 2015, Mr. Mordini kindly spent his time and did an informal study. Mr. Mordini. He spent many hours. Again, it was an informal study, but it told us that our reserves were grossly insufficient for what was coming. Last year, we then commissioned a formal reserve study, which some of you have seen, some of you haven't, but it again says that by 2023, we need $2.5 million in reserves to handle the infrastructure that is going to be coming due. Roads, roofing on the clubhouse, paths on the golf course, irrigation on the golf course. This study was carefully analyzed by several people, including Larry from the golf course, the general manager, John Rydell, and the Strategic Planning Committee, and they went through it line by line, looking at what we felt was realistic and what was unrealistic. That says we need $2.5 million by 2023. Currently, and other people are going to talk primarily about the financials, but we have $800,000 plus or minus, and we put only $70,000 a year into the reserves. There's no way that that can bring us up to the reserves that we need. Road status. Well, let me do the golf course first because that's a little bit simpler. When we took control away, we found out that the golf course had been mortgaged, if you will, to Pam Lacey and her husband Howard. Grand Elk didn't own the golf course anymore. They mortgaged it for $16 million, according to Pam, and nobody was willing to pay Pam $16 million for the golf course. Rick Jernigan, who is no longer with us, and I investigated this at length. And in 2013, we had an information meeting, and we had votes, and 87% of the voting members voted to buy the golf course. Now, well, personally, I think it was a good decision. Some people may still disagree, but we own the golf course. We paid $300,000 in back taxes because Pam was not paying her taxes. We got Pam from $16 million to $1 million. We are paying her $50,000, if my math is correct. She wanted a 20-year payout for her retirement, so we pay her $50,000 a year for 20 years. If my math is wrong, some math person tell me, but I believe that's right. That's correct. Now the roads. So we have an agreement with the town that we were not part of, that was probably illegally voted and signed by Grand Elk, but that was 2007, and the lawyers tell us, too bad, so sad, that was 2007, you probably don't have a leg to stand on. The roads are expensive. Just 10 Mile Road, the surfaces that we redid were $500,000 or close to it. Do you know the exact amount, Joe?
I don't.
Okay, but it was close to $500,000 just for 10 Mile. We have 5.1 miles of road and 0.4 miles of the 4-lane road by City Market. We have curbs that are falling apart, that have been damaged somewhat. We have an agreement with the snowplow company. They're going to remove the damaged curbs, and we're going to pay the concrete to put the concrete in. The town has steadfastly, for all the years I've been involved, refused to discuss the roads. We have a new board and a new mayor. We've had one meeting with him, and they are open to discussions. We don't know yet where that's going to go. But last week, thanks to where Fred, you and who else worked on the road?
Mike Claney.
So thanks to Fred and Mike Claney, they presented a plan for speed bumps, for speed signs, to try and improve traffic in the neighborhood. The town agreed to pay the entire $17,000 bill. I am stunned. But I think it's a good indication from having talked to the mayor and having this go through last week that we have some people that realize that we are a development, we are members of the community, we are not a developer, and that they owe us some road maintenance. That's where it currently stands. We're I would say I am reluctantly optimistic because of what I've been through, but just having them sit and talk and be willing to open negotiations, I think is a huge step forward. So that's really the moving forward part, is hopeful, but whether we get anything out of that or not, we don't know yet.
One thing I think we need to point out is that anytime we ask for something, it's possible that Granby Ranch will ask for the same thing.
Right.
So we have to be sure everybody understands, Granby Ranch is still a developer-directed community, and we are Granby. Just like any other house in Granby, we are Granby. So if we go into the door and talk to them, it's different than.
Well, that's one of the big points that we've used in our preliminary meetings, is exactly that. We are not a developer. We are a community that you have annexed. We are residents of the community, and we deserve the same services that everybody else in the community gets. And everybody else in the community gets snow plowing without having to pay for it out of their own budget. They get road maintenance and curb maintenance. They get police, they get fire. So we're going to them trying to open the dialogue that it's time you recognized we are not a developer. We are part of Granby. We are a community. And just because Joe is telling me I need to shut up, but that's a very important part of our negotiations.
Thank you, Tom.
That was kind of haphazard.
Hey, hang on just a minute, John. You know, I was a bit remiss at the very beginning here. I did not introduce the other members of the board. I think most of you know them, but we have David Hall sitting close to me here, and over there, Sharon Silva. Also, a very important group that had a lot of input into the planning of this meeting was the Strategic Planning Committee. And we're going to be hearing from John Riddell next. But also in attendance, we have Joni over there, and Bill. And David Hall was also on the planning committee while we went through the stages of the reserve study. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Can I just put it in the pocket?
Sure.
Okay. All right, I'll try to go fast. So I headed up the strategic planning committee that started a couple of years ago because we realized that we bought the course, we were kind of winging it, going by the seat of our pants, doing the best we could, but we had no strategic plan about where we were going, 5 years out or 10 years out, whatever. So we needed to pay attention to that if we were going to become a really viable community, and financially for sure. So our strategic planning committee included me, David Hall, who's now also on the board, Bill Holdampf, I think I saw Bill back there, and Joni Sugimura. And we've been meeting long and hard, and we were the ones who ultimately came up with the idea for this community investment fee. We started to look at the issues we were facing. We commissioned the reserve study. And so in a nutshell, I'm going to kind of quickly take you through what we're trying to accomplish in the Strategic Planning Committee and what the reserve told us about what we needed to raise financially to be able to move ahead and be successful. So this was our mission. What do I need to do, Dave?
Right button.
I'm hitting the right button.
Middle twice.
Yeah, I'll let you do it. So this is our mission, basically. To create and foster the implementation of a 5-year plan that preserves and enriches the quality of life and economic well-being of owner members. That's what we're trying to do. So for all of you, hopefully you will agree with this, that this is a good idea. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. So I think this is kind of a key statement here. This kind of tagline that we put together. Grand Elk is the premier 4-season community in Grand County for families seeking an active outdoor lifestyle. Now, and I've been thinking about this a lot over the last couple of years, if we don't have the resources we need to improve the golf course, just to maintain the golf course and our association areas, then maybe we want to change this to Grand Elk is the mediocre Any hands on mediocre? Or Grand Elk is the run-of-the-mill, kind of normal, average community. And I don't think anybody wants that. I think that this is what we're all after. We want the premier community in terms of living here, but when we sell our places too, we want it to be premier in terms of the values that we can get for our properties when we ultimately sell them. Okay, thanks. So, real quick, Tom kind of already talked about this. When we think of Grand Elk, we think of the owners, all of you for sure. But there are investors here too who are buying properties, building homes and selling. They're part of this community as well. Our builders and developers are part of the community. They're building homes for people who are going to move here and be our neighbors. But don't forget, we have employees who are part of this community. Mike Ritter and Larry Burks and all the folks who help to make this thing happen are critical people in our community. And we've also got a lot of customers who come to play public rounds and such. We kind of think about them as community members as well. When we started the strategic planning process, we said, okay, we better figure out what are the guiding principles, kind of the rudder for our strategic planning, and these are the three things. And every decision that we made had to pass muster here. First of all, anything we do has to enhance the experience at Grand Elk, including our golf course, restaurants, social events, and many other amenities. And I would have to say we're seeing more and more of that. We got a book club now, and that's great. There's just a lot going on in the community, but anything we do needs, one, to make that experience better for all of us. Two, we want to improve the attractiveness of Grand Elk properties and increased homeowner value. Bottom line, increased homeowner value. But a third one that kind of relates to those two is cultivating relationships with other entities in the county. So the Board of County Commissioners, the town of Granby, who hopefully we're getting a little better relationship with. And there are some neat things going on there. So for instance, Mountain Family Center, a not-for-profit that serves disadvantaged in Grand County. We recently had a group of people come together and put up 20 grand in their capital improvement effort there. So those are the things that we think about when we make decisions. I should say we aren't done with the strategic plan. We've done a fair amount, but we still have work to do. Okay, so this is what we created, a detailed strategic plan outline. Anybody wants to see that, happy to send it. We did spend time, you probably remember, because we sent out information to people on our strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, try to get a feel for how those things line up. And we assessed our community. We did, I'm going to talk about the reserve study. That'll be kind of my primary focus here. But we did a realtor focus group. We had 7 realtors come who are active in selling properties within Grand Elk, and that was really fascinating. That was last year. And because we had a pretty poor reputation. Most realtors said, I don't know if I want to bring people there. I don't know if this is a financially stable community or not. And we had the greatest, I would say, whoever was there, I mean, I thought it was wonderful. And we now have those realtors, we go to them with questions that arise and they respond to us just like that. It's great. And we did an owner survey of, what was that? An owner survey of, can you go back one? Nicely done, okay. Utilization and interest. And we use that information too in our, and we'll continue to use that in the strategic plan. Okay. So I think we're going to the reserve study. All right. I won't get into all of this detail, but let me tell you that last year we went out and looked for reserve study groups. Most of you, they're probably professionals who do this all over the country, and Colorado certainly has its share. We looked at 3. We looked at Association Reserves, which is the company we went with, and one of the reasons is because they also did golf clubs and golf courses in their work in the past, and we felt we really needed that because that's our biggest asset here. We also looked at a group called Advanced Reserves and Aspen Reserve Specialists. We didn't choose them, we didn't think they were strong, and they didn't do golf courses. So, by the way, these are companies that are credentialed and they have certain stipulations and requirements about how they do their work. If you're interested, you can go on the website because we did download actually 2 reserve studies. We did one for the golf course, Grand Elk Club, and we did one for Grand Elk Owners Association. They're kind of 2 different entities. The association doesn't cost us as much. That's the roads, of course, that's a big deal. But there are a lot of, I'll show you some of the other items that are included there. The golf club is where most of our assets are, and our expensive assets, and the things that are expensive to maintain. And you can go online and you can find that information. In fact, they gave us, I'll show you what it looks like. So when you get there, you don't get too, this is what the study looks like. It's fairly long, and it gives all the assumptions and background information. And then the thing that it did for us that's most important is it looked at every single asset, a boiler, the water pumps in our water station, on and on and on, detailed stuff. What is the life expectancy of those to survive? What is the cost when you need to replace it? So that was the information we got. So, quick summary. The key assets of the association, GEOA, is Grand Elk Owners Association. So we have the curbs and gutters that Tom talked about, the asphalt seal and repair, the asphalt resurfacing. That's a big issue. As you know, we did 10 Mile Drive, and Stan Opperman, who is a senior person at one of the largest road companies in Colorado, did that for us. In fact, he was involved with us in researching the reserve studies that we got to make sure it was accurate and in line. And so he was very helpful on that. Pole lights, fencing, entry monument, directional signs, street signs. So that gives you a flavor of the kind of things that we have to maintain on the association. And then the next one, do we have the club? There it is. Okay. This is really where the big money goes, other than the resurfacing, which is very expensive. But we have the bridge decks, and you'll notice some of those bridge decks are being resurfaced now. The ponds and lakes, no small item. There's issues around having them lined, making sure that they're properly lined. Our irrigation system is huge. As some of you have heard, and we factored in, starting in 5 years, we probably need to get that irrigation system redone. And that's probably a $1.82 million item in and of itself. Our practice area has been improving. We're going to see more of that. I think we're going to get a practice bunker. Mike shakes his head. Yes, that's pretty cool. The golf cart paths. There's pretty much the golf cart path that is just in bad shape that needs to be redone. Bunkers need to be redone. Some of them need to be redone because they don't drain properly, so you got to take the whole thing out, redo the drainage. The bathrooms, the maintenance facility, grounds equipment, on and on, the pool and spa. Those are all the things in the club that we have to pay attention to. And finally, and I don't think you have this slide, David, but that's it. I had one other. Where was it? Well, I think they'll get into, oh, here it is. I just want to say, looking forward, here's what we have to do. We have 2.7 miles of road resurfacing that we need to do. Why do we know that? Because Stan Opperman walked with Mike Claney and I one day the whole place, and we looked at the roads and figured out exactly what needs to be done and when. We have a 1/4 mile of new curbs and gutters, some of which is going to get paid for by the snow removal people. We want to re-shoulder significant lengths of the roadway, the irrigation system, and some of these other things I mentioned, fence repair and restoration of bunkers. So there's a lot to do. I'm excited. I know that the community investment fee has gotten some people wondering what it's about. Some people are alarmed by it. But as far as I'm concerned, if we don't handle these things, we will become what? The mediocre community in Grand County. That's what we'll become. I don't think, how many want to be the mediocre? Come on. All right. I don't think anybody wants to. So we're just trying to make this the best place we possibly can. All right.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
All right, so now we need to talk about numbers. Make sure we're on the right slide here. There we go. Okay, so this is the nuts and bolts of how we actually got to the numbers that you're going to see. I'm going to talk about the expense side of the numbers, and then Joe's going to talk about how do we generate enough revenues to pay for our future obligations. Because as John said, we really don't have a choice. We need to pay for our future obligations if we want to maintain our property values and our quality of life. As John said, we did 2 reserve studies, one for the club and one for the association. They were done to generate a 30-year cash flow basis. And what the plan does is that it calculates how much we have to contribute every year to stay current on those things. You don't want to wait 5 years down the road to where we've got $2.5 million worth of work to do and then say, oh, I've got to come up with that money, because then the choices narrow and they're not quite as palatable as the choices that we have now. Funds from beginning balances are pooled, and then the yearly contribution rate. The yearly contribution rate's what's key here. We have, as Tom said, about $70,000 that we can contribute from current dues. It's going up some because we've got a number of houses in process right now. We're going to have a number of new members of the community. So we're estimating, and I'll get into the real numbers here in a minute, we're estimating over the next 5 years that we may be able to contribute about $570,000 at the current pace to the $800,000 that we've already got in the fund. And let me see if I can get this to work.
Did you put a new battery in that, David, this morning?
I put one in there yesterday. Okay, so here's how we did. Here what the variables are. The first one was future replacement costs for reserve components. The company that we hired, Associated Reserves, as John said, they were one of 3 candidates that we interviewed for this. We felt they were the most qualified. They had the most experience in not only a community like ours, but with golf courses. So we went through, or they went through and developed future replacement costs. They looked at every component of our community. And if you look online at that study, it's very comprehensive. The study that you see online right now is not the original study that they did, because one of the things that we like about their firm is they are willing to engage in an iterative process with us. There's things about our community that we know that they might not know, specific things. And so we got a first draft back from them and we said, hey, we know this will last longer than that. This is not the norm. And so we looked at some of those things and made changes to them, and they went back and incorporated those in their studies. The same thing with anticipated replacement dates. Some things last longer here. A lot of things don't last as long as they do on the Front Range or at sea level in Houston or someplace like that. We also used projected increases over the 30 years in construction costs. We didn't say we're just going to take, we did this in 2018, we didn't just say we're going to take 2018 dollars. And then we also factored in what kind of interest income that we might get as we built up this fund.
That arrow?
Just page down.
Okay.
So, here's the first one. All right, this is the assumptions on the reserve requirements. This is what we came up with after we went through and looked at what they had come up with. We had Stan Opperman look at the estimates on the roads. He made some changes to the estimates that they had developed based on what he knows from his work on our roads and the resurfacing and so forth. We had Larry Burks go through every single line item on the golf course study that they did. Larry was able to cut quite a bit out of that because, for instance, the irrigation system, we figure with Band-Aids and And duct tape, we can get maybe 5 more years out of this irrigation system if we're very fortunate. At the end of that time, the estimate was that the cost now to replace it would be $1.8 million. It'd go up to about $2.1 million. We can finance a little bit over $1 million of that. The hardware we can finance. We can't finance the labor and the design work and so forth on that, but we can finance some of it. So what we could finance, we took out of these calculations because that's going to be a different line item in our budget. It's not something that we have to plan out 30 years for. Other things that Larry did that or took out that they had in there, every golf course wants to refresh their greens and tee boxes every so many years. And Larry said, you know, we've got these kids that want to work as much time as they can work, and our golf season's short here. So what Larry has instituted is he's instituted a plan to kind of maintain the tee boxes and the greens on an ongoing basis, so we don't get 5, 8, 10 years down the line and just have to totally rip out a green and redo it. So we're using some of the labor that we have already, people that want to work longer than golf season, so that we can mitigate some of those problems and eliminate some of those long-term expenses. Even with that, over a 30-year time period, we'd need reserves of about $3.1 million for the club. The Owners Association, roads, curbs, gutters, and so forth. Common areas, another $1.9 million. Total reserve requirements over 30 years, just over $5 million. We've identified capital expenditures in just the next 5 years of almost $2.7 million for the golf course and the Owners Association combined. So if we take that $2.7 million away from that $5 million, the reserve requirements in that 6 to 30 year period are about $2.3 million. Well, how come we got so much coming up right now? Well, the golf course is about 20 years old, and the community's almost that old. So we're getting right on the brink of having to pay the piper for things that haven't been done in the past. You heard Tom talk about buying the golf course. The lady that owned it, and I wasn't here, but when y'all bought the course from the lady, she had not been maintaining it to the standard it needed to be maintained to. That caused some additional problems with the irrigation system and other systems that now those chickens are coming home to roost. So we've got a big nut coming up here in the next, well, it's 4 years now. We did this study a year ago. So if you say that $2.3 million is going to come due in years 6 through 30, Associated Reserves, being a consulting firm, they want you to fund that at 100%, okay? We don't believe that has to be funded at 100%. We think we can take some of that pain at a later date, if you will. So what we did is we took that number and we cut it in half, and we said we want reserves for that years 6 through 30 at $1.1 million. Now, one of the reasons that we did that is another thing that Tom talked about. We are working with the town on the roads. We're all tax-paying citizens in here. We pay taxes to the town of Granby, we pay taxes to the county, and we ought to get something for those taxes. Tom and I have had conversations with the mayor and other folks at City Hall, and they agree with that in principle. Working out the details is a little bit more problematic. And we can't really discuss the details right now because it is an ongoing negotiation, and there are things that they would like us to keep confidential right now. But suffice it to say, we're working on that. If we can get part of that knocked out, then we won't need as many reserves or as much in reserves in years 6 through 30. So if you take that at 50% and you take what we got coming due in the next 4 years now, we've got a total identified funding need of about $3.8 million. That one. All right. Here's our reserve requirements based on what we have now. We have a current reserve balance of about $800,000. If things continue to go on the arc that we're on now, as far as new members, new houses, lots changing from secondary lots to primary lots, and as you know, we've had a number of lots that have been bought out of the GID that are now being built on, and we're going to have, GID doesn't pay any dues, okay? Now we're going to have houses, dwellings on those lots that will begin to pay dues. We're projecting that we can contribute just out of dues flow without raising dues in the next 4 years about $570,000. That would give us, at the current accrual rate, $1.37 million to apply to that $3.852 million, which leaves us with a shortfall of $2.482 million. And you know whose problem that is? It's Joe's, because he's going to talk about that now.
Thank you.
There.
All right. So I'm going to talk about how do we solve this problem? How do we go about it? So we looked at revenue options. And as we looked at revenue options, we were keeping in mind that whatever we did, we wanted to mitigate the impact on property values and future sales. And we wanted to allow the opportunity for future asset enhancement. So we were trying to keep these things in mind as we worked to go forward on this. Well, right now we have 2 revenue streams that we can work on: golf and restaurant, and dues increases. With regard to the golf and restaurant, well, anybody who's eaten at Grand Elk knows our restaurant, we got a kitchen that's rather small. Making our restaurant into a profit center is something that's not going to happen in the near future. We work hard to make it a break even, but it's not going to be a source of revenue for our community. Golf rounds. We challenge Mike Ritter every year during budget time. Are you charging enough? Can we get more revenue out of our customers that come in? They're not the members, but customers that come in and play golf. And I think Mike squeezes it as hard as he can. Is that a fair statement, Mike?
Yes, I think we're not operating in a vacuum. There are other, there are the 3 other courses in the county, and just the general pricing for Colorado golf.
So we have those restrictions, parameters, if you will. So really can't get much extra out of golf and restaurant revenues. So what about a dues increase? Well, we can do a dues increase. Now there's an issue with the dues increase you have to understand. Within Grand Elk there are 684 lots, building sites, whatever you want to call them, units. But only 362 of them can have their dues increased. Because and that's 53% of the total lots out there. And this is as of January 1 of 2019. We can only raise dues on 53% of the lots. The other lots, the dues are set by agreement or contract, or the lots are owned by the GID and we can't assess any dues. So what do? Well, the math works out. Now this is just a math exercise. Thank you. So David told us before we have this target we're trying to get to by December 31 of 2023. We want to raise additional revenues of almost $2.5 million. If we raised the dues, and this would start January 1, 2020, if we raised the dues $200 a month or $2,400 a year, there are right now 219 primary dues payers, lot owners, if you will. We would raise annual revenue of $525,000. Secondary lots are lots that where Stu owns a primary lot and he owns additional lots. Those additional lots are called secondary lots. They pay dues at the rate of 27% of the primary. So if we raise the dues $200 a month or $2,400 a year, the annual increase on the secondary lots would be $648. And at January 1, there were 143 secondary lots. We'd raise $92,000 a year. So over the 4 years, we would raise $2.4 million, pretty close to the number we're looking at. So that's if we used increase in dues as the sole source of trying to reach our revenue need. It's a pretty high increase, and we'll hit on that a little more later. What about a special assessment? Well, special assessments are kind of like dues, and once again we run into the same issue. We can only assess a special assessment on 362 lots. Again, those numbers are as of January 1. So on 362. And if, I'm just throwing this out, if I'm trying to differentiate this from the dues increase, let's just say we put a special assessment on every eligible lot of the same amount, primary and secondary. That would come out to, we would need $6,850 per lot total over the next 4 years, and that would get us, again, almost to that place. I don't like special assessments. It's a high hurdle to get it approved. Once again, we must go to the members. A special assessment is a one-time thing. The issue we're dealing with is ongoing. We have a big infrastructure to support. And a special assessment, while it fills a hole for a moment, doesn't address it on an ongoing basis. So I don't think a special assessment is a good way to go. So that brings us to the community investment fee. Once again, we look at what's our shortfall. And one of the things I don't know if I mentioned this before, well, I think I did, but so we looked at some what ifs if we go the route of a community investment fee. So you have to do a lot of assumptions there. What's the average price of a home that's selling? The average price. So we use $600,000 here. Average transactions a year, 27. Now this is not just new homes, where a builder has built a home and sold it to a new resident, but this would be also a sale from one owner to another new owner. So this would be total number of real estate transactions per year. And right now, what we are proposing in the beginning is that the community investment fee would be 1.5%. And the reason we started at 1.5%, we've heard from our builders, others in the community, while legally you can go to 3%, we think that would be disruptive. That might hurt real estate sales and development. So we wanted to use a much lighter touch. So we start out with 1.5%. Now, using these what ifs, how much money would we raise by December 31 of 2023? It's $1 million. Well, that doesn't get us to where we need to be. So as we propose the community investment fee, we are fully aware it is not the sole answer. It is not going to make up the full funding need that we need. There's going to be a need for some dues increase with that. And What that will be, I'm not sure. The board would have to look at that in the budgeting cycle after we know the results of this initiative. So, why a community investment fee? There's what we call an equity of participation. It's the only revenue source that applies to all the private ownership categories. So as lots are developed out of the GID and sold, we get a measure of revenue off those. As those lots that are pay dues under the contractor agreements, when those are sold, we get some revenue. And again, when other new people come in, we get revenue from that. A lot of current residents have a lot of blood, sweat, and tears invested in this place. And there's a feeling that it's not inappropriate to ask somebody new that's stepping into this new, all of these amenities, the facilities that they will now have access to pay a community investment fee to help finance that is not inappropriate. And another thing, future impact. I know there are some that think the community investment fee might hurt real estate development. Well, a $200 a month increase in dues starts getting to the point where it's excessive. And excessive dues drive down property values, decrease sales, and indeed could encourage lot abandonment. There are people that own a primary lot so they can golf. They pay the current dues. If that goes up 70%, 80%, they might look at that and say, well, why? It's not worth it, and they might abandon it. So, in summary, or at this moment, we've told you how we came up with the numbers that define our need. It's a very thorough process, a meticulous, deliberate process to come up with that number. We've looked at what the revenue options are. In proposing the community investment fee, we're also telling you that there will have to be dues increases with it. So it's not just a one solution fits all. It's going to have to be a combination of using these sources. So that's where we are. And at this moment, yes, John,
One thing to what you said.
go ahead.
The other thing that we found at the Strategic Planning Committee, we went and we talked with realtors, homeowners associations, management companies, title companies. No one tracks who's doing a community investment fee. The name for it is a transfer fee, if you've heard that. By the way, it's not a transfer tax. If any of you have seen any signs around here, I'm not sure anybody has. I haven't, but anyway, it says vote no on a tax. Well, we are not a taxing authority. It's a fee, and it's controlled by the state association, CCIWA, Iowa, which Tom talked. And one of the things we found is it is used a lot by associations because it's one of the few ways that you can raise the money that you need. So this is not an unusual thing. I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you, John. Thanks for the help. All right, so now we're to the part where we want to hear from our members with their questions. And that's the thing we want to start with first, questions, so that we make sure you understand things. When we get to the end of the questions, then we're going to solicit comments, statements of support, statements of opposition, why didn't you do this or that? So at this point, please give us some questions.